Okay, hi there. So in this part of the video, we are going to look at variables in Python. Okay, so in order to understand variables, we should start looking at some sample code. But before we do that, let us test our remote connection here. So first thing first, ensure that your remote connection is connected, and then run a command and see whether it works. Yeah, so like my terminal is now working. Okay, so now let's move on to trying to understand variables. Now I'm showing you a code snippet here. This is actually the blink LED code snippet. So if you look at this code snippet, there is actually one variable here in one of these lines. Okay, and that is in line 4. The name of the variable here is LED pin, and it is storing a value of 23. So variables are containers that we use to store values. Alright, so there are many ideas for variables, many different data types of variables. There's also ideas on how Python automatically infers the variable data type. So it's it can get quite detailed. But what we are going to do is take an approach that I'll teach you enough such that you are able to complete this entire module. Yeah. A variable usually has a name like this, and there will be an assignment to it. Now, after we assign it a value, we usually use the name in the rest of the code. So for example, this variable was created here on line 4, and then in line 7, we are using this variable, saying that LED pin is of a type of output. Now, we have not gone through what is this GPIO.out, but not to worry, as the name implies, is using this GPIO port which is on the Raspberry Pi, and it is setting it to out. This is not a variable, this is a library. Okay, so variables are anything that we just create on the fly here, and then we assign a value, and then we use the variable later to refer to this value. Okay, why not just put 23 here? You can actually do that. Now, if you do that, you'll read the number 23 here. But the problem becomes that, let's say in 2 to 3 weeks time, you read back the same code. You might not remember what you actually connected to the number 23. Alright, so especially if you have a lot of LEDs and other sort of outputs. Alright, so if you have other forms of outputs or other forms of inputs, if this is an input, if you have other forms of input, you might not know which pin number connects to what. For example, a LED pin, an ultrasonic sensor that we're going to use in the later part, or a DHT, which is a humidity and temperature sensor. So naming them is a very good thing to do, such that we can read the names and understand, I use a LED pin, which is actually pin 23 of the Raspberry Pi. Alright, so this is the reason why we use variables and we give them names. And we will also manipulate them a bit later in the code where we assign values dynamically and so on. So we'll look at all of that in the later part. So this is how we create and we assign a value for a variable. Just to test it out, what we're going to do is, let's create a test script. Yeah, so in order to do that, I've already created a test.py here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it. So I'm going to type nano test.py, and then let's open this script first. So this is my earlier print hello world. Yeah, so instead of that, I'm going to create a variable named LED pin 2. Okay, so whenever we create variable names, there are actually rules. Yeah. Okay, so the rules actually state that we need to start with either an underscore or a letter. We cannot start with a number. Variable names, for example, cannot have spaces. Yeah, you can't say that this is one variable because there's a space. Yeah, and you can use letters, numbers, and underscores to create your variable. Alright, so to keep things simple, we're just going to use letters and numbers. Yeah, we're not on a full-fledged Python course to really try and understand all different combinations. Yeah, so as to make life easier, whenever we create a variable name, we're just going to use letters, numbers, and underscores at most. Yeah. Okay, so that we don't run into errors. So let's say I do this LED pin 23 and then I print LED pin 2. Alright, So this is my Python code. LED pin 2 is 23, and then print LED pin 2. Then let's save my code, and then let's run my code. So now you should know how to execute a script. So just execute it. So you should see the number 23 appear here. Yeah. So what happened is, it's not printing the name of the variable, it's printing what it contains. Yeah, it's a container, something like a Tupperware box where you put something inside and then you take it out. Yeah. All right. So similarly here. Yeah. So treat it like a container, or any food container. Yeah. You put things inside, you take it out here. When you print it, you take it out. Yeah. So when you read the code though, you are reading it this way, LED pin 2. Yeah. So naming variables meaningfully is another thing in software engineering. So if you do software engineering, there are certain principles that they follow, such as camel case, Pascal case, and many ideas. Yeah, on how to come up with a convention on how to name variables and many other things, classes, functions, and so on. Yeah. So if you have some programming background, you might know all of this. If not, not to worry. What you know here is more than good enough for you to complete this IoT course. Okay, so this is how we create a variable. Yeah. So let's try another variable. So let's say let's create another variable called test again. Yeah. But this time around, I want to put the value 23.2. Okay. So sometimes you might have numbers with decimal points here. For example, when you measure temperature. Okay. Let's put a comment. Okay, so now another new thing that I'm teaching you here is a comment. So when you put a hash here, it means that whatever you're writing here is not computer code. It's just for the user to read. It's called a comment. A comment. Okay. So you have this variable test, and then you're assigning it the value 23.2. Okay, so now this is different from this. This is actually a pin. This is actually a temperature. So whenever you're reading things from a sensor might give you a value that has a decimal point number. Yeah. So this will also be treated by Python as a decimal point number because it can automatically infer the type. So let's print test as well. Okay, let me save this. And then let's execute this. So if you see, the first one I'm printing the pin number, the second one I'm printing the temperature, which is 23.2. Alright, so we can create variables on the fly like this. Okay, so let's open this back up. Alright, so in programming terms, we call this, hang on, let me get to the back. We call this an integer. Yeah, a whole number. Yeah, integer. So the computer stores this value as an integer. So there are data types that Python automatically infers. It sees this. Okay, so this doesn't have a decimal point, so therefore this is of type integer. Whereas this number is of type float, which is a computer type to say that it is a decimal number. Alright, so these are the two types that are quite key for us as we are using sensors. So these sensors will throw back either an integer or float depending on the type of sensor used. For example, the ultrasonic sensor will send a pulse of ones and zeros, which we are going to look at. So those are actually a list of ones and zeros, which are just basically integers. And then the temperature sensor and the humidity sensor will send in a number, which is a float. Yeah. So whenever we connect to the sensor and read the sensor, we need to store the values in a variable so that we can use them in the later part. So that's the reason why we have this. Now, the third type of thing that I want to oh shucks, I think I closed the connection. Okay, so if you accidentally close the connection like that and you try and reopen this, you might run into an error. Oh, I didn't. Okay, great. Okay, so if you accidentally close the connection, you can just wait and then hopefully your connection passes and you're back in. Okay, so change the user to Pi, click connect. Okay, so let's get back in. So let me list again to see that my test is there. Yeah, so nano test.py without the save. Yeah, without the save, not much of a difference. So we can just carry on from here, not a problem. Okay, so the next thing that I want to go through is a string data type, a string. Yeah, so this was actually a variable that stores 23, and we said that this was an integer. Yeah, we lost some of our comments. Integer. Yeah, this is an integer. Whereas when you're talking to sensors, you might end up getting temperature values which are of decimal point numbers, which is represented as a float. Yeah, we call these data types. Okay, so without too much formal introduction, yeah, so this is a float, any decimal point number. Now the third type that we're going to handle is strings. Yeah, so let's say we call this test underscore msg is equals to, we are going to assign something. Now I'm going to use double quotes here and then say hi there. The temperature is space, and then okay, so whenever we try and print messages out, right, print text out, we want to print a meaningful message. Whenever let's say we measure a temperature and then we want to print it out, so we can use the print command together with the message, and then we print the value out. So in Python, how we do that is we use a string here first to create the message. Yeah, so we can do this in Python, and it will print the message first. So let's run the message only first and see the output. There's no number here, it's empty. So let's run and see what's the output first. So x, y, and then let's run Python test. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so you can see that these are the earlier two prints, and then now you have a message. Hi there, the temperature is, let's say you read a sensor value here, 23.2, right? So, and you need to write this out. So how do I connect this to the other one? Yeah, so one thing you can do is to put a comma and then print out the variable test. Now what does test contain? Test contains the sensor value. Yeah, or let me rename this to be a bit more meaningful. Yeah, you see, so this test is not a very meaningful variable name. So let's rename this to temperature underscore val. Yeah, val is a short form for value. Okay, temperature val. So let's change this as well, and let's change this top print as well. Yeah, before there's an error. Now if you try to print a variable that doesn't exist, you see I changed this, right? And if I try to print test which doesn't exist, there will be an error. Okay, so you can actually try it out and see how it feels. Yeah. Okay, so and then let's change this to underscore val. Okay, so we are printing two messages here, this comma the temperature val. Yeah, so let's save this, and then let's run this. Okay, so we are printing out this message. Hi there, the temperature is this much. Yeah. Okay, let's open this back up again. Okay, so we get extra brackets when we printed that over there. So another way to prevent that is to also put a plus sign, that is to add this into the string message. But before we can add a number to a string message, we can convert it to a string. Yeah. Okay, so we can convert this to a string, and then let's save this and run this. Yeah, so now we will have a different form of output. So this was where your message was printed in this format. Now this is a cleaner format where you convert that number to a string and then you add that number to your message so that your message looks meaningful. So in the later parts of this video, you're going to learn how to write down the sensor value that you get, or write down the output values that you get. So these are quite useful and neat tricks that you can do in Python to actually use variables to print outputs, read from sensors, connect GPIOs. Alright, so as we go along, you're going to start to understand how I'm actually using them. This is just an intro. If you didn't get the full message, you will see them in action in the later parts. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you.